function of laser battle stations is to destroy enemy missiles.
Women working on, who are studying the effects of education on girls, that kind of thing, things that back up the work that we do. So back in the early days, maybe the kinds of doctoral programs that women were getting were a little bit more off the wall or widespread, but now they're more focused on gender kinds of issues. But they're international and American fellows.
So the LODE program is to develop and demonstrate beam control technologies on a Brassboard experiment now undergoing testing at Lockheed's Palo Alto Research Laboratories. The LODE Brassboard consists of 4 major assemblies on a 30-foot-long optical table. Simulating the high-power laser is a 5-watt krypton-ion laser operating in the visible at 0.65 microns. It delivers a 1-centimeter beam to the beam transfer assembly. The beam transfer assembly serves 2 functions. It simulates the jitter and wavefront disturbances inherent in a high-power laser, and it contains the first 2 elements in the beam control system, a fast steering mirror and a deformable mirror. The beam expander assembly performs 4 functions. It expands the beam to its full out-the-door size, it aims the beam at the target, it provides beam quality data to the control system by means of holographic gratings on the primary mirror and an outgoing wavefront sensor, and it corrects spatially complex wavefront errors with its segmented, deformable primary mirror. This Brassboard experiment simulates an operational system in space, which would also require a segmented mirror in order to boost the components into orbit. The diagnostic system consists of an interferometer to measure residual aberrations, a jitter sensor to monitor beam pointing stability, and a far-field camera to record energy on target. The heart of the LODE Brassboard is the control system, which must measure the outgoing beam quality and command the active optics to correct wavefront and pointing errors. This is a complex system consisting of 7 interconnected computers, thousands of lines of software code, and data rates up to 19 megabits per second. The basic control system operates as follows. A laser beam is introduced and deliberately modified by disturbances. It passes through active optical elements capable of correcting wavefront errors and providing fine pointing control. The beam then goes to truth sensors, which measure outgoing beam quality. A portion of the outgoing beam is sampled as it leaves the primary mirror, the last optical element in an operational system. This sample is sent to the outgoing wavefront sensor, which is the main beam control system sensing element. Data from the wavefront sensor is sent to the control processor, which determines the commands for the active optical elements. Now, there are 3 active elements in the LODE Brassboard. They include a fast steering mirror, a fast deformable mirror, and a large deformable primary mirror. Each is commanded according to which portion of the beam disturbance it is best able to correct. There is also an alignment annulus assembly, a device that generates reference beams for pointing and wavefront control. A key feature of this control system is the hierarchical offloading that takes place between the fast deformable mirror and the primary mirror. The fast deformable mirror responds first to all sensed wavefront errors, but then all low-frequency commands are offloaded to the primary mirror, which is more capable of correcting spatially complex aberrations. Of the 3 active elements in the LODE Brassboard, 2 are located in the beam transfer assembly. The fast steering mirror is a 3-inch jitter mirror utilizing piezoelectric actuators that can be driven in a 300 Hz closed loop. The fast deformable mirror utilizes 19 piezoelectric actuators to close a 50 Hz loop on a 4-inch beam. The third element, the primary mirror, is located in the beam expander assembly. It is mounted on 56 electromagnetic actuators and can be driven at 5 Hz. Because the primary mirror is segmented, there are several corrections and compensations that must be performed. The primary mirror not only has fine figure actuators for deforming the mirror, but also bipod actuators for rigid body motion of each segment. These bipod actuators are motor-driven micrometers controlled at approximately 1/10 of a hertz. Sensors to track the position of each segment include feedback sensors in the fine figure actuators and gap sensors between the segments. Data from these sensors are incorporated into processor calculations to ensure proper performance of the beam control system. Tilt or translation of each segment is handed off to the bipod actuators, thus maintaining maximum dynamic range for the fine figure actuators. Another key feature of the LODE Brassboard is the method by which the outgoing wavefront quality is sensed. Holographic optical elements on the primary mirror diffract a small portion of the incident energy through a small hole in the secondary mirror to the outgoing wavefront sensor. Each of the 92 gratings on the primary mirror focuses its light at a particular location on the sensor's focal planes, forming a matrix of spots. The wavefront sensor's electronics then centroid these spots and pass this data to the control processor. The pattern formed by this matrix of spots becomes a very accurate representation of wavefront quality. Here is what the holographic spots look like, highly magnified. In use, they all fit on a 1 centimeter square focal plane. Each quadrant of spots corresponds to one segment of the primary mirror, and if all 4 segments are perfectly co-aligned, the quadrants are nested and the rows and columns are straight. The outgoing wavefront sensor display provides much useful data about the spots. On this monitor, the grid in the center is displaying the centroids of each spot, as calculated by the wavefront sensor electronics. The boxes along the bottom contain intensity distributions for one row or column of spots, as selected by the operator. The patterns in the upper corners are intensity plots for the 2 focal planes. These give an indication of how strong the signal is in each window of the array. 2 arrays are required since they are scanned in a linear fashion. One gives x-axis data, the other gives y. In this particular case, the column being monitored at the bottom corresponds to the columns indicated. The diagnostic system for the LODE Brassboard consists of 3 sensors: an interferometer, a jitter sensor, and a far-field camera. The outgoing beam, which is 63 centimeters across, must be reduced to a 1 centimeter beam for evaluation by the diagnostic system. This is accomplished by reflecting the beam off this 24-inch paraboloid, turning it at a 4-inch flat, and bringing it to a focus directly in front of this lens. The lens then collimates the beam and is distributed to the various sensors. The interferometer is a radial shear instrument that interferes the seen beam against a 15 times enlargement of itself. There are 2 focal planes in the interferometer, one to display a standard video image of the interferogram for human consumption, and one to capture the image so that it can be digitized and analyzed by the computers. This standard video image of the interferogram shows the 4 segments of the primary mirror. Movement of the fringes is due to air turbulence and vibrations of the table. These conditions constitute optical noise that will be substantially reduced through environmental control prior to performance tests. Although the interferometer is imaging the primary mirror, every element in the beam train, including the intervening atmosphere, is contributing to this interferogram. This image is the arctangent output from what is currently referred to as the software interferometer, where the phase calculation is performed by the STAR computer. For the performance test, it will be replaced by the hardware interferometer, where the same phase calculations will be performed by custom designed electronics at the higher frame rate required for those experiments. The displayed scene is the same as before, but the intensity has been converted to phase data and the image color enhanced. The interferometer electronics allow various analyses of the data, including seen beam and reference beam intensity, phase analysis, which is directly comparable to wavefront error, and intermodulation intensity, which is a measure of phase data quality. These outputs are essential, not only as a measure of beam control performance, but also as a means to perform closed-loop optimization of the optical system, a process known as pseudo-stellar calibration. The jitter sensor utilizes quad cells to measure outgoing beam stability against a reference beam. The reference beam originates in the alignment annulus assembly housed in the center of the primary mirror. The far-field camera displays the intensity distribution of the outgoing beam after it has been brought to a focus. It is a measure of overall beam quality and the concentration of energy on the target. To illustrate how the interferogram and the holographic spot patterns are related, the video images of both will be shown while the active elements are driven. First, this is how the fringes respond when the fast steering mirror is driven, first in elevation, then in azimuth. By contrast, note that only a small portion of one of the segments is disturbed when a fine figure actuator is commanded. Demonstrating these events once more as both monitors are displayed simultaneously shows the direct relationship between wavefront quality and holographic spot motion that makes the wavefront control by this method feasible. By sampling the spot centroids 6,000 times per second, the control system is able to analyze the wavefront and correct the jitter and aberrations which are expected from an operational laser weapon. One major task of performing the LODE experiment is to keep the system in proper optical alignment. When necessary, the primary mirror must be refigured slightly to regain the proper wavefront quality. This is accomplished by driving small motors on the back of each fine figure actuator. These motors allow the mirror segments to be coarse-figured without using any of the fine figure actuator's dynamic range. Although this process is currently performed manually by an operator viewing the interferogram, it will be automated during the test sequence as part of the pseudo-stellar calibration. The segment that has just been figured is yielding a wavefront of λ/2 RMS, excluding the effects of button print-through. Even better results are expected when the fine figure actuators are driven in a closed loop with the interferometer. Recent experimental activities on LODE have involved tests of the control system's ability to utilize feedback from the outgoing wavefront sensor to detect and correct wavefront disturbances. Jitter control, which maintains the pointing stability of the outgoing beam, uses the output of the wavefront sensor as processed by the tilt estimator electronics for an error signal. For this demonstration, the error signal is displayed on an oscilloscope screen while a multi-frequency tilt disturbance is induced in the beam train. The upper and lower traces display the two axial components of the error signal. When the control loop is closed, correction commands are issued to a custom-designed fast steering mirror whose response exactly compensates the tilt errors, driving the error signal to zero. As the control loop is disengaged, the error signal assumes its previous value. The same result can be observed in the motion of the far-field pattern, where jitter degrades the time-integrated intensity on target. Enabling the jitter control loop stabilizes the far-field pattern to where the resultant motion is a small fraction of the pattern diameter. While jitter is essentially a 2-degree of freedom issue, control of the outgoing wavefront aberrations through the adaptive primary mirror is a far more computationally complex problem. First, estimation matrices must be measured by perturbing primary mirror actuators in sequence and recording the resultant motion of the spots as seen by the outgoing wavefront sensor. The result of a full sequence of measurements is a 56 by 192 element estimation matrix as defined by 56 actuators and 192 X and Y spot centroid values. Storing this matrix in the computer provides the map by which the control system can correct spatially complex aberrations on the outgoing wavefront using the adaptive primary mirror. Initial performance of the wavefront control system is tested by inputting a static wavefront disturbance by displacing the primary mirror actuators in a random fashion and using feedback from the outgoing wavefront sensor in conjunction with the estimation matrix to correct the disturbance. The initial interferogram shows a moderate quality wavefront, which is then degraded by the random actuator displacement. The iterative corrections applied to the actuators by the control system can be observed as the interferogram is driven back to its initial configuration. This test is taking place slowly, since it is a test of the control process itself and is performed in time-step fashion. The effect of the input disturbance on system performance is graphically illustrated by the distortion of the far-field pattern. As the control system corrects the disturbance, the pattern is driven back to original size and energy density on target is maximized. Subsequent to these integration experiments, a comprehensive sequence of performance tests are planned, beginning with coarse performance in air, followed by fine performance in a helium environment. When completed, these tests will demonstrate the viability of laser beam control and paved the way for additional development and testing of laser weapon systems for the Strategic Defense Initiative.